Our group is here to present our usability research on Apopia. You might be wondering, what is Apopia? Good question. And that is the first part we will cover today. A brief introduction of the game we studied and our previous work on it too. Next, we will go over the user research in detail, the top issues we discovered, and our recommendations in how to make this game better. Apopia is a classic adventure game with dark mystery twist and fun puzzles alongside the journey. There are 6 game pillars make up the gameplay experience. They are story-driven exploration, puzzle solving, dialogue progression, traversal, and scavenging. We conducted heuristic evaluations and identified 3 critical issues. The first issue we identify is that game difficulty does not rise progressively, and the challenges lack balanced rewards. Secondly, the game does not offer incremental and timely learning. It lacks help and clues for the players after failing too many times. Thirdly, the game's default display setting is pixelated, creating illegible text and unclear UI elements that do not meet accessibility guidelines.
After completing our heuristic evaluation, we decided to explore these issues more in depth with a user research, as well as other issues that might be found by players and was not addressed in our heuristic evaluation. For our user research, we wanted to investigate the game balance, learnability, and guidance, game UI, and difficulty. Here are our research questions to explore these areas. Does the player play with purpose and progress towards the game's goal? Does the player feel satisfied by the rewards they receive after completing a challenge? How does the issues in game UI, illegible text, no status indication, impact the overall game performance of the player? How does the lack of timely learning and help impact the player's ability to complete a task? What elements of game cause frustration for the player? So here's our research protocol and how we conducted research with our participants. We started with an introduction of our research overview and we asked for consent. Then we clarified questions from our participants before starting the session. We also introduced Think Aloud protocol with a short exercise. Then we continued with a 20-minute unscripted gameplay with participants' Think Aloud comments. Finally, we finished our study with a semi-structured interview and asked questions about their overall gaming experience. Now, let me briefly introduce our research participants. We conducted the research with 3 people, which included 2 male and 1 female participants between the ages of 20 to 30 with no past experience playing the game. We identified 4 most prominent issues in Apopia. Here's an overview of these issues. Objective requirements were not clear in the game, which are the things the player needs to complete in order to pass a challenge. Therefore, we think this is a major problem. Game balance. Throughout the game, the reward does not match difficulty and leaves players unsatisfied. Agency. Unfortunately, there are multiple ways to play the game due to the linear storyline. Lack of clarity. Finally, the game fails to present clear element presentation or differentiation between enemy-ally status, which causes a lack of clarity.
Here's our first issue about objective requirements. The objectives are clear, but the objective requirements are not clear. The issue both emerged in our heuristic evaluation as well as our user research. In this screenshot, you see the player escaping the collapsing cave with obstacles coming in front of their pathway. After failing the task, the only message displayed for the players is you didn't escape in time, without any explanation. While knowing they need to complete the challenge in a shorter time, players did not know how much time they had to complete the objective. The lack of objective requirements made the players feel frustrated and confused. Our recommendation would be placing a timestamp for the player to refer as they're completing the task. Our next issue was game balance, where the rewards did not match the difficulty. This issue emerged both in our heuristic evaluation and user research. When the player escapes the cave, they are given the option to save the cat or escape for life. After the player saves the cat and successfully completes the challenge, there is no reward given to the player for completing the extra task. We think this is a very important issue for game balance, and it might discourage users to continue playing the game when challenges don't have adequate rewards. Our recommendation would be implementing a gamification of collecting different kinds of badges to show the reward or sense of accomplishment after completing a long task in the game. Our last issue was agency, where we found that there weren't multiple ways to play the game. This issue was identified only in our user research. When the player first interacts with the eggs, the game introduces the idea that the player can pretend to be an egg for the bats to carry them. The dialogue ends with the main character saying, "How about me?" However, the player is not given any options to choose. In our user research, all participants wanted to pretend to be an egg and continue with the story, but they were disappointed when this option was not given to them. Trying to figure out what they should do next, when the players got close to the spikes, the only option to pretend to be an egg was finally revealed. This allowed them to cross the road and continue to play the game. We think this is problematic because the game only reveals options when the players follow a fixed storyline, which consistently happens throughout the gameplay. However, the players should be allowed to play the game in multiple ways. Our recommendation would be getting the player play the egg from the start, play the egg interaction from the start. Our last issue, which is lack of clarity, was also only found in our user research. When participant 1 and participant 3 first came across with the bats, they wanted to get close to them with excitement. However, the bats were biting them and causing them to move slowly. But the players felt confused because they did not expect being bitten by the bats. So the game failed to give a clear indication of enemy-ally status. In addition, when bitten by the bats, both players expected to see a health or a time bar in order to know if being bitten was something that could cause them to die or how long the bite would last. However, there was no indication of health status or time bar, so both players were very confused about the consequences of this interaction. Our recommendation for better clarity is to include an enemy status for the bats. For instance, adding a red hue over the bat's body once the player gets close to them. In addition, we'd recommend adding a time status that indicates the duration of the bat's bite.
Lastly, these are our remaining issues. Help is not offered after multiple attempts of completing a task. For instance, if player keep failing an objective during the same stage, the game wouldn't offer any help or tips. Difficulty is not up to the player or customizable by mode, aspect, or approach. Controls are not responsive or consistent. The game has a very prominent cursor issue and also fails to communicate how controls work in a clear way. And this comes to the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening.